And every Tuesday, I will come on here and I will recap the entire weekend. I'll give you my thoughts on all of the games, all the performances, etc. On Thursdays, I will give you my entire, whether it's a 16 game slate, whether it's a 14 game slate, whether it's a 13 game slate, no matter how many games are on the docket, I will give you my money line, which of course who's going to win the game, no matter what the spread is. I'm going to give you my money line predictions for each NFL week of the season. And then I will also give you 5 games, which I will call my best bets, which is where I look at the spread of every game and I pick 5 games essentially to bet the spread. And I keep track of all my predictions. Last year, I was barely 500 in best bets. I aimed for about 60%. I was about 62% in money line predictions, which I will absolutely take. I had a good year picking the money line, did not have a good year picking the spread. So, again, that will start on Thursday. I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview today as we get into now going through my 2023 NFL predictions. On Friday, on Substack, I produced this huge article that's sort of like a 23, 24-minute read where I broke down every single team, their record of the season, postseason results, who's going to win the Super Bowl. It will be linked in the description. A lot of what I'm going to tell you here is going to be in that article, but I'm also going to provide additional analysis here as we go for the next 45 to 50 minutes of me bantering about every single NFL team. And I'm also, again, going to give you my best bets of over-unders for the season. So I picked, probably one, sometimes 2 teams from each division that I think for sure, if you bet on this team, they're over-under, depending on which way I go. I think for sure you're going to be able to make money this season because the NFL is a quarterback-driven league, and we pretty much all know who's got the best quarterback and who's got the worst quarterback in each division. For a lot of these divisions, the tough choices was between who was going to be the second and third team in the division, not who's going to be the first team, not who's going to be the fourth team. So now, further ado, we are kicking things off in the AFC East. So in first place, I had the Buffalo Bills winning the division at 11-6. I had them going the 10.5 over then. Miami, I have them tied with Buffalo at 11-6, but I think Buffalo wins the end-to-end conference tiebreaker. They will win the division. I do have Miami going over the 9.5 win total. The Jets, I have them at 10 wins. Their over-unders at 9.5. And then New England, I have them at 7-10. They're over-under 7.5. And I would bet the New England Patriots under 7.5. I think there's no way they get to 8 wins. So let's start with the Buffalo Bills. Y'all know the last 2 years have ended in disappointment for Bills Mafia. Of course, 2 years ago, they went toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes in the divisional round in an epic game where they thought they had the game won, but Patrick Mahomes had 13 seconds left on the clock. And then there was last year where they just got demolished by Cincinnati in the divisional round. Now, they did not have Von Miller in that game. Von Miller suffered an injury, on Thanksgiving last year against Detroit. Their defense really suffered at the end of last season. Von Miller is going to be back, though he's going to miss the first 4 games of the season, but Von Miller is going to be back. I think there will be a big help to their pass rush. I love the addition of Dalton Kincaid at tight end. Y'all know how I feel about Josh Allen, but you also know how I feel about one Sean McDermott, who I think is absolutely declined as a head coach since Brian Daboll left as the offensive coordinator to go be the head coach of the Giants, and how I feel about the Stephon Diggs drama. I don't think it's a good look for the Bills. I think the Bills are still a very good team, though I don't think they're the dominant team they were 2 years ago and even last year throughout the most of the regular season. But as long as you have Josh Allen, as long as you have those weapons, and they still have a very good defense, a great secondary, Tre'Davious White's coming back, they're going to win games. They're going to be in the postseason. The question is, can they overtake Miami for the division? And in my opinion, the Dolphins could have absolutely won the AFC East, and I was toying with them because of the addition to Vic Fangio at defensive coordinator, because of the addition of Jalen Ramsey at corner. But with Jalen Ramsey supposedly out until December, that made me slide Buffalo back into the division spot. It's very close because of Tua Tagovailoa's health and Jalen Ramsey's health. That's what gives me reservations about the Dolphins. If both those players were healthy, the Dolphins may have won 12 or 13 games this year. That's how good I think Mike McDaniel was. That's how good Tyreek Hill was. That's how good Jalen Waddle was. When Tua Tagovailoa was healthy last year, he looked like an MVP candidate after looking like a bust under Brian Flores. That's how much an offensive coach can help a struggling quarterback, and especially if you get Tyreek Hill to go alongside Jalen Waddle. The Dolphins are legitimate scary. They have a good secondary, but they really needed Jalen Ramsey to put them over the top at corner. I think Vic Fangio is a good defensive coordinator, but we saw Miami struggle at the end of last year without Tua, and I just think Tua misses too many games to put them in the division lead. Now we got the media darlings of the 2023 season. Mr. Ayahuasca himself, Aaron Rodgers, has entered the building to save the Jets. You all know about the Jets' expectations. People have been talking about the Jets since Aaron Rodgers went there. All anybody wants to talk about is they won 7 games last year with Mike White, Joe Flacco, Zach Wilson at quarterback, Garrett Wilson putting up monster numbers. The defense, led by Sauce Gardner, led by Quinn Williams, a lot of young talent. They were really good. A lot of people think Aaron Rodgers should be worth 2 to 3 wins for this Jets team. The problem is their schedule is brutal, as we know. First 6 weeks, they take on Buffalo, Dallas, New England, Kansas City, Denver, and Philadelphia. At that point, I could really see a 2-4 realistic start, which means they have to start rattling off wins if they're going to get to my 10-7 prediction. My thinking is there is a huge game right after Christmas, week 17, against the Browns. That game is in Cleveland, and the Browns are going to be one of those teams with the Jets fighting for one of the last wildcard spots. I think the winner of that game gets in. The loser goes out. I think Aaron Rodgers is a vintage Rodgers performance, and the Jets break the longest active drought of not being a playoff team in the National Football League this year. Now, New England. You all know ever since Tom Brady has left, I have criticized Bill Belichick. I have criticized the New England Patriots. I don't like their roster offensively. I don't think they have any special pieces to help one Mac Jones. I don't think Bill O'Brien is going to be that significant of an upgrade compared to Matt Patricia. I mean, anybody's going to be better than Matt Patricia, but when your wide receivers are Juju Smith-Schuster and Devontae Parker, you're not going to go anywhere. It's like Bill Belichick wants to sabotage the organization, in my opinion. It's like Bill wants to play 1980s football in 2023, and they have a brutal schedule. They have to play the Jets. They have to play the Saints. They have to play the Eagles. They have to play the Cowboys. They have to play the Chargers. They have to play the Chiefs. They have to play the Broncos. They are going to get some breaks in there. You know, they'll get Washington and Sam Howell. They'll get Anthony Richardson and the Colts. They'll get Daniel Jones and the Giants. These are either rookie or young quarterbacks that Bill will have figured out, and New England will take advantage, and they'll win games. But if they go up against a Tua, if they go up against a Jalen Hurts, like they do in week 1, if they go up against a Dak, if they go up against Herbert, if they go up against Aaron Rodgers, it's going to be tough sledding for New England because New England defense cannot overcome a inept offense. And that's the story of this Patriots team. And with their tough schedule, again, there's no way I see them getting to 8 wins. Moving on to the AFC West. So I'm taking Kansas City. I'm taking the over at 11.5. I have them at 13-4. I'm taking the Chargers over at 9.5. I have them barely over at 10. Same thing with Denver. Their over and a half is 8.5. I'm going to take the over at 9. And Vegas is over unders at 7.5. I'm going to best bet Vegas. I would take the under. I think the Las Vegas Raiders are going 4-13. Now for Kansas City, what are there not to say about the defending world champions? Last year, people, including myself, thought there was no way they could replicate what they did with Tyreek Hill, and yet Patrick Mahomes went out there. He not only won Super Bowl MVP, he threw for over 5,000 yards and 40 plus touchdowns. I do think that they're going to lose games. Some people like Nick Wright think they're going to go undefeated. I don't think that. I think 13-4 is realistic and another division title for one Andy Reid. Now, the Chargers. We all know about the new addition of Kellen Moore's offensive coordinator replacing Joe Lombardi. The Chargers think Joe Lombardi was the problem and not Brandon Staley. I have a feeling that, again, even with a great rookie like Quentin Johnson, a wide receiver, to go along with Keenan Allen, to go along with Mike Williams, potentially Austin Eckler's last year as a Charger, they have a lot of great weapons. I think they're going to be able to score points. Herbert is potentially a dark horse MVP candidate, but their defense, yes, they have J.C. Jackson. Yes, they have Asante Samuel. Yes, they have Joey Bosa. Yes, they have Khalil Mack. Yes, they have Derwin James. But can you trust Brandon Staley? We saw it in the Jacksonville game. I don't think Brandon Staley is made to be a head coach in the National Football League. I think this will be Brandon Staley's last year as the Chargers head coach. I do think they get into the playoffs. I think they're a very talented roster, and they should have no excuses not to get into the postseason. Specifically when Denver's roster is down, because I was debating. I think the Broncos, I think Nathaniel Hackett was a complete disaster a year ago, a la what Freddie Kitchens was in Cleveland. I think Sean Payton is going to be able to do some good things with Russell Wilson. I don't think Russell Wilson is washed, but I don't think he was the player in Seattle either. But they don't have a ton of pass rushers. They did upgrade Mike McGlinchey in the offensive line, which the offensive line, absolutely did need help. Javonte Williams, a really good running back, but when, Tim Patrick goes down in training camp, when Jerry Jeudy goes down in training camp, when KJ Hamler goes down in training camp, when they trade away Albert O, it gives me a lot of pause for Denver as an organization, and I think they feel like this is going to be more of a rebuilding project than maybe Sean Payton initially thought when he took the job. So I'll give them 9 wins. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team. I think it's in one of those things where they're going to get better as the year goes on, and sort of it's going to be year 2 where Sean Payton's presence is really felt in Denver. Now, as for Las Vegas, this team, I only have them at 4 wins, and I told you to bet the under on them. They're a very weird franchise because they do have some foundational pieces. Obviously, defensive line, Tyree Wilson, the long edge rusher they drafted in the first round of the draft, to go along with Chandler Jones, to go along with Max Crosby. You got the great weapons in Michael Meyer, the young kid they drafted at tight end, Hunter Renfrow, and of course Devontae Adams. Josh Jacobs supposedly is on his way back. There's a lot of weapons there for Jimmy Garoppolo to work with. The problem is Jimmy Garoppolo, we know, is never healthy. And when you're in the Murderers Row division that they're in, to go along with the Murderers Row conference that they're in, I think the appeal of, hey, we got to get a superstar quarterback. We're dealing with Patrick Mahomes. We're dealing with Justin Herbert. We could be dealing with a great Russell Wilson again. We cannot win 6-7 games and roll out Jimmy Garoppolo and be mediocre every single year and be stuck in neutral. I think Vegas wants to tank for Caleb Williams. I'm not sure that they're going to get him. I think they're going to be around 4 or 5 in the draft, so I don't even think they're going to be in the range of Drake May. The question's going to be, though, I think Vegas really wants a quarterback, and will Josh McDaniels be that quarterback? Because as I mentioned with New England, if Robert Kraft really wants to win, do they fire Belichick and do they ask Josh McDaniels to come back? Because McDaniels has not worked in Vegas. McDaniels has a great relationship with the New England players. And I really feel like, and I always thought he would never leave New England after declining the coach job. I thought that, he would be the heir apparent to Belichick, and I still sort of believe that he is. I think he wanted to go out on his own. I think, he looked at it like I did. You got Max Crosby, you got Chandler Jones, you got Devontae Adams, you had Derek Carr at the time. Like, this roster is pretty good. But him and Derek Carr did not mesh. Him and Jimmy Garoppolo do have a relationship, but again, Garoppolo is never healthy, and I don't know how good Aiden O'Connell is going to be as their backup, and that will ultimately be the downfall of the Las Vegas Raiders, who I do believe only win 4 games this football season. Now we head to the AFC North, where the Bengals at 13-4. I do not see a world where they don't win less than 12, so I would bet the over on the Cincinnati Bengals. It's a high over, it's 11.5, but I would bet it. Baltimore, I have it 11-6. Over-unders at 9.5, so I would take the over. Pittsburgh, I have it 10-7. Their over-unders at 8.5, so again, I would take the over. And the Browns, I have it 9-8 in 4th place, but still above 500. Their over-unders at 9.5, so once again, I would barely take the under. Now, Cincinnati, I told you to best bet them 11.5, take the over. But the interesting thing is, and I'll spoil this a little bit, I don't think week 1 is going to be a fun time for the Cincinnati Bengals. But they are indeed the number 1 contenders to Kansas City in the AFC. And even with Joe Burrow's lingering, a cap round to training camp, as long as Joe Burrow is their signal caller, they're going to be fine. We saw them struggle last year out of the gate. They started 0-2. They started 2-3. They couldn't really block anybody. They lost to Cooper Rush. They lost to the Steelers. But in the end, they were arguably a bad penalty away from getting back to the Super Bowl. Joe Mixon is back. Jamar Chase is back. T. Higgins is back. Yes, they did lose a couple pieces on the defense side of the football, namely Jesse Bates in the secondary. But Lou Anarumo is a great defensive coordinator. Trey Anderson is still there. Logan Wilson is still there. And in my opinion, as you know, you need a lot more offensive weapons than defensive weapons in today's NFL. As long as you have Tyler Boyd, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon, that's going to be a very hard offense to stop. And I never bet against Joe Burrow in the Cincinnati Bengals when it comes time for the postseason, because Joe Cool just has ice water in his veins. Now, Baltimore. Remember in March when it felt like the majority of the NFL offseason drama was going to come from the Ravens? Then Jalen Hurts and the Eagles did their contract, and all of a sudden Lamar Jackson came back to the Ravens. And I was saying at the time, this was the right decision for the Ravens. They had no other choice. They were almost unwatchable without him at quarterback, and they were one of the most fun watches in the league with him. They were the only team, and I keep saying this, I'm going to say it one more time. Last year, the Baltimore Ravens, not the Eagles, not the Chiefs, not the Bills, not the Niners, not Dallas, not Cincinnati. The Baltimore Ravens were the only team in the league to hold a double-digit lead in each of their first 10 games. That was being the Baltimore Ravens. That's how dominant they were before Lamar Jackson got hurt. And they're obviously bringing in new offensive coordinator Todd Monken. They brought in Odell Beckham. They drafted Zay Flowers to go on with Mark Andrews, Rashard Bateman, Devin Duvernay. J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards back in the backfield. Their defense leaves a lot to be desired. Marlon Humphrey's going to miss the first few months. Kyle Hamilton's a decent safety. Roquan Smith's a pretty good linebacker, but they don't have a lot of pieces. It'll be incumbent on Baltimore to play, average to at least a little bit above average defense. It's going to be on Lamar Jackson and this offense to go out and score points. But if Odell Beckham is healthy and if Lamar Jackson is healthy, again, to go on with Andrews and the speedster Flowers and Bateman and Duvernay, they have a legitimate offensive core and a very good offensive line, even with the loss of Orlando Brown going from Baltimore to Cincinnati. We've seen it with Baltimore over the last 2 years. If they're healthy, they are a playoff team and a somewhat of a Super Bowl contender. When they're not healthy, they're barely a playoff team because they can barely win a game without Lamar Jackson, a quarterback. I'm going to give Baltimore the injury bug goes away this year. I give Baltimore 11 wins, and I think that they get back to the postseason. Now, for the last 2 years, I predicted the downfall of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have not liked the Steelers roster, and I think, whether it was Ben Roethlisberger or Kenny Pickett, I thought they were limited at quarterback. Yet the story of the Steelers is maybe the only franchise in history to do this. They still don't have a losing record with Mike Tomlin as their head coach. They also, when TJ Watt plays since he's been in the league, are 59, 26, and 2. Without him, they are 1-10. That is the stat for the Pittsburgh Steelers. When TJ Watt plays, they basically win games. And Kenny Pickett developed a little more around the end of the season. I think George Pickens going with Deontay Johnson is an excellent wide receiving combination. I like Pat Freiermuth, the tight end. They gained Isaac Samoa from Philadelphia in the offensive line. Obviously, Roderick Jones and George as well. So they've shored up some pieces on the offense side of the ball. No matter what talent they have in the defense, which besides TJ Watt is not much in my opinion, Mike Tomlin always seems to make it work. And I'm done down them. Until they go under 500, they're going to continue to go above 500. And their schedule is easy enough that I think they can get to 10 wins. Some people even have this team overtaking Baltimore and Cincinnati in the division. If Lamar and crew get hurt, I can see Pittsburgh being in second, but I don't see them overtaking Cincinnati. But I think Pittsburgh is a very, very good football team. The funny thing is, I actually like Cleveland's roster better than Pittsburgh and Baltimore, my hometown Cleveland Browns. But Kevin Stefanski is on the hot seat. I thought he was on the hot seat last year. I would have fired him at the end of the Jets game because Kevin Stefanski is not proven to be a good head coach since COVID. But now you have a full year of Deshaun Watson under your system. You have new defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz, who obviously is Super Bowl champion with my Philadelphia Eagles. Jim Schwartz will get that defense attacking. And with Zadarius Smith opposite of Myles Garrett and the Browns' corner situation with Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson, Ronnie Harrison in at safety. The Browns defense is going to be pretty good. The question's going to be, and we've seen in the preseason, this new element of the offense where it's, Wes under center, 3 tight ends, 1980s football, run the ball with Nick Chubb. It's a lot more spread out. It's a lot more Deshaun Watson base. It's a lot more what he ran at Clemson and what he ran with the Houston Texans. I think Elijah Moore, by the way, is a sneaky fantasy football edition this year. And to go along with Amari Cooper, I think David Njoku's going to have a good year. Donovan Peoples-Jones, a pretty good wide receiver. The Browns, there is a world where they could overtake Pittsburgh. They could overtake Baltimore to be second in the division. I just don't trust Stefanski and Watson. It's more of a show it to me and prove it to me, and then I will believe in you. This AFC North, in my opinion, is by far the toughest division in football. Last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I predicted the entire NFC West to be above 500. It was 2 years ago because Russell Wilson was still there in Seattle. Now, you had San Francisco, who we all thought Trey Lance was going to be spectacular. You had Matthew Stafford coming over. Kyler Murray just came off a great season in Arizona. This division here, I think all 4 teams could finish above 500, even in a vaunted AFC, because all 4 of these teams are viable. Speaking of viable teams, I think the AFC South is better than people think, though I'm still awarding the division by 4 games to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who at 9.5 is my favorite over bet. Take it right now. I think they're going 12-5. Second place, so shockingly to maybe some of you, I have the Indianapolis Colts at 8-9. Their over-under is only 6.5. Houston, I have shockingly, there's a lot of you probably, they're over under 6.5. Guess what? I got them at 7. I'm taking the over. And Tennessee, they're over under 7.5. I'm taking the under had 7. Let me explain why quickly with all of these 4 teams before we get to the official AFC playoff structure. So last year, the Jags were expected to take a step forward in the right direction because they no longer had that quack Urban Meyer as head coach. They had a real grown-up in Doug Peterson who was going to get Trevor Lawrence back on track. And boy, did he ever. That incredible comeback against the Chargers in the wild card round, and they played Kansas City pretty tough in the divisional round. And with their division being bad, and with Houston, still growing, Tennessee outside of DeAndre Hopkins having no weapons, you can still put 8 in the box against Derrick Henry. And Indianapolis being so young, I think Jacksonville can take advantage of their weak division. And if they split games here with Buffalo, Kansas City, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, if they go 3-3 in that 6-game stretch, 12-13 wins, and a number 1 seed is not out of the realm of possibilities for this football team. And by the way, Calvin Ridley is going to be spectacular. He is a true number 1 receiver, which they did not have last year. And if you thought Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, and Evan Ingram put up numbers last year to go along with Travis Etienne, Calvin Ridley is going to be a difference maker for Jacksonville. Let me talk about the Indianapolis Colts. Because last year, boy, weren't they one of the most disappointing teams in the league? They had Matt Ryan. They had Frank Reich. By midseason, they had Jeff flipping Saturday and just musical chairs of quarterback. But you really look at this team, and it's the reason why they went out and they got offensive coordinator from the Eagles, Shane Steichen, and why they drafted Anthony Richardson, who's already been named a team captain. And I loved Anthony Richardson coming out of Florida. Next to Bryce Young, I thought he was the second best quarterback. I had him rated higher than CJ Stroud, who, of course, did go number 2 to the Houston Texans. Now, Richardson's raw, but he has a ton of potential. Steichen's coach, Justin Herbert. He's coached Jalen Hurts. He's going to get the most out of Anthony Richardson. And even without Jonathan Taylor, if you think about it, Anthony Richardson's going to run a lot. They can still use a multitude of backs. I don't think they're going to need Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is just a bonus if he does come back and does have that resolution with the Colts. But offensively, you still got Michael Pittman. You still got Alec Pierce, a wide receiver. Great offensive line with Quentin Nelson leading the way at left guard. And if they're healthy, they're a top 10-ish offensive line in the league. Defensively at each level, you got Kenny Moore in the slot. You got Shaq Leonard at linebacker. You got DeForest Buckner on the defensive line, along with Kwity Paye and some of these other pieces. So there are pieces there for Indianapolis. I don't think their roster is as bad as people think. Now, they don't have a 30-year-old on the roster. And that may be a problem because you're going to need to weed on veterans, and they don't have a veteran presence sort of in that locker room for Anthony Richardson, because I wouldn't consider Gardner Minshew exactly a veteran. But I think this team is going in the right direction, believe it or not. If Jim Irsay just keeps his paws off, let the great Chris Ballard do his job, let Shane Steichen do the coaching, and Anthony Richardson is going to surprise people this year. And by the way, their final 4 games, Pittsburgh, Vegas, Houston at home. They also go down to Atlanta. There's probably 4 swing games there. And if they, maybe if they go 3-1, 4-0, real chance to get some real momentum. And I think Anthony Richardson could even be a fantasy football stud going into the fantasy football playoffs this year because of that weak schedule. Now, as I mentioned, the 2023 Houston Texans, they're going to be a competent team. They have CJ Stroud. Then they went up and they traded for Will Anderson. They have the 2nd and 3rd pick in the draft. The best defensive player in the draft, maybe next to Jalen Carter, in Will Anderson to go along with CJ Stroud. Now, I don't love DeMeco Ryans, a defensive head coach, because you guys know I think, young quarterbacks really need either a great offensive coordinator or preferably an offensive head coach to talk about their development. So I don't love that, but the pieces they have on this team are not that bad. Dameon Pierce, Robert Woods, John Menchie, Dalton Schultz. They're among the offensive targets that Stroud's going to be throwing to, and they have veterans and Laramie Tunsil and Shaq Mason on the offensive line. Now, the defensive line has a bunch of veterans. Sheldon Rankins, Jerry Hughes, Chase Winovich, Denzel Perriman, Steven Nelson, Jimmy Ward, and then the young rookie, Derek Stinley Jr. I think Houston has a lot of talent. I think they're going to try to win now. I think D'Amico Ryans, who was a former Texan, is going to set sort of that Houston culture, and I think they can make some real noise. They got some players. They have Arizona, or excuse me, they gave up a first round pick to Arizona, but they have Cleveland's pick as well. So they're going to have a first round pick again to add some talent, which I would think could be, another wide receiver or a defensive lineman. But I think Houston is finally, with Nick Caserio there, going in the right direction. Now, the Tennessee Titans. I don't know what to make of this team because Mike Vrabel's a great coach, but outside of Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins, who there must have been a reason why people were not lining up to get DeAndre Hopkins, because the fact that he went to Tennessee and they gave him all that money, to me, like, Tennessee says, we need you because our first round pick, Treylon Burks, is not a number one. He may not even be a number two. I'm not the biggest fan of Burks. Ryan Tannehill is a statue, and I think the Titans are sort of outdated. And besides Jeffrey Simmons and Kevin Byard, who, by the way, are both older on that defense, they don't have barely any talent. And I think Indianapolis and Houston, with their two young quarterbacks, are going in a better direction than what Tennessee went in when Will Levis got drafted in the second round. And I don't like Will Levis. And I said it before the draft that I don't like Will Levis. I think he's immature. I don't think he throws a great ball. And I think Malik Willis could actually give Tennessee a little bit more of a dimension, right? The zone read, the mobile aspect, open up the running lanes for Derrick Henry. But they want to be old school. Vrabel is still old school. As great of a coach as he is, he still wants to run the football. He wants to play defense. He wants to use a statue at quarterback. And so I don't have a great feeling about Tennessee this year. I have them in the basement of this division. And a lot of people think Houston's going to be bad. A lot of people think Indianapolis is going to be bad. I think Tennessee, low key, has a chance to be bad. This whole division, I mean, Richardson went fourth. Stroud went second. And then Will Levis could have gone third, but he ended up going in the second round. So this whole division outside of Jacksonville has selected quarterbacks in this year's draft. I think we're going to see Will Levis by Thanksgiving. I don't think he's going to be very good, and I don't think this team is going to be very good. And I am least optimistic about the future for these teams for Tennessee than I am any other team in the division. So that leads us to the AFC conference standings. The Chiefs will get the 1 seed at 13-4. Tied with them because Kansas City beat them head-to-head in the regular season. Cincinnati at the 2 spot. Jacksonville a game behind them at 12-5. Buffalo in there at 11-6. Wild cards. Baltimore and Miami both finished 11-6. The Jets finished 10-7. Then in the hunt, right behind the Jets, the Steelers and Chargers right there at 10-7 because of AFC tiebreakers. The Jets get in over them, as well as the Broncos and Browns both finish at 9-8. There's only 7 spots that can be thrown around. I think there are 11 worthy playoff teams this year in the AFC. You combine that with, I think Indy gets to 8 wins. I think Houston, New England, Tennessee, they get to 7 wins. So my worst team in the AFC, the Las Vegas Raiders, get to 4 wins, which means most of the bad teams are going to be in the NFC. And we'll get to that here in a few short minutes. AFC wildcard predictions. It will be the number 7 seed Jets and the number 2 seed Bengals, which I do think that, obviously the Jets defense could potentially give Cincinnati some problems. I think the Jets offense could give Cincinnati's defense some problems. But at the end, it's Joe Burrow against Aaron Rodgers. I think the Bengals get it done. The battle of Florida between the Dolphins and Jags. I don't think the Jags have the secondary to keep up with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. As long as Tua is healthy, the Dolphins will win a playoff game this year and knock off Jacksonville at home. Then we have a very interesting game between the Ravens and Bills, which will take place in Buffalo. But I think Lamar Jackson and this Ravens offense comes in and on the road and shouts Buffalo, who once again goes backwards. And the questions about Sean McDermott continue as Buffalo is eliminated by Lamar Jackson and co. in the wild card round. Which leads us to the divisional round, which will feature the Dolphins. Tyreek Hill returning to Kansas City to take up Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, though he will not get it done. And Joe Burrow and the Bengals, face off against Baltimore for the third time this year. It's really hard to beat a team, 3 times. I don't think they sweep. I think they'll split throughout the regular season. Home team wins each game. And I think Cincinnati in the jungle at home will defeat Baltimore and move on for a AFC Championship game rematch for the third straight year. Same location in Kansas City. Bengals won, Chiefs won. In the end, I think Joe Burrow ends up putting up just about a field goal more than Patrick Mahomes. Cincinnati gets a late key stop, and the Bengals move on to the Super Bowl, where they look to revenge their Super Bowl 56 loss to the Los Angeles Rams. The spoiler alert, they will not be playing the Rams again in the Super Bowl. And Mahomes' quest to go to the Super Bowl once again for the third straight, to go back Super Bowls. And I believe it'd be like, 3 Super Bowls in 5 years or something like that. Their quest ends in the AFC Championship. So who does Cincinnati play in the Super Bowl? We're going to find out as we get to the NFC. We're kicking things off with the NFC East. We got the Philadelphia Eagles at 13-4. Their over-under is 11.5, so I take the over. Dallas 11-6. Their over-under is 10.5. I would take the over by a game. Washington, opposite situation. Their over-under is 6.5. I would take the under. I think they go 6-11. And the Giants over-under is 7.5. And I would say we bet the under here because I think the Giants are not going to get this to 8 wins. I think they only go 3-14. So with my Philadelphia Eagles, the Super Bowl runner-ups from last season, they're going to have to avoid the almost annual Super Bowl loser hangover. But I believe that if there's a team that could do it, it might be these Eagles from Philadelphia because Jalen Hurts has said nothing but the right thing since being rewarded this $250 million contract over 5 years after the Super Bowl. You still got A.J. Brown. You still got Devontae Smith. You still got Dallas Goedert. You still got one of the best offensive lines in the league, along with the new multitude of running backs, and obviously DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Gainwell, Boston Scott, Rashard Penny. The defensive line, we know, is just absolutely sick. Josh Sweat, Frederick Cox, Jordan Davis, Hassan Reddick, Nolan Smith, the number 9 overall pick in the draft, Jalen Carter, Milton Williams, Brandon Graham, Derek Barnett, to go along with the other kids they got out of Georgia in Kiwi Ringo. Then you got Eli Ricks, the undrafted corner out of Alabama, who made the team. Kobe Dean stepping into the starting linebacker role. James Bradbury and Darius Slay both return at corner. This roster is absolutely loaded, and there is, in my opinion, no excuse for this Eagles team to not only win the division, but potentially get back to the Super Bowl. Yes, it's hard, but again, in the NFC, the weaker conference, there's not a ton of competition in their way. Arguably, the number 1 contender to them, the Dallas Cowboys. Now, they no longer have Kellen Moore, as we detailed. Kellen Moore is now a Los Angeles Charger because apparently Mike McCarthy wants to run the ball more with Tony Pollard. And I do not love that strategy in 2023 football, but they still got Micah Parsons. They still got CeeDee Lamb. They still got Trayvon Diggs. They still got Dak Prescott. They still got DeMarcus Lawrence. They added Brandon Cooks. They added Stephon Gilmore. And once again, a theme that's going to come out for the NFC version here. In this weaker conference, Dallas as a top 2, if not top 3 roster in the conference, in my opinion. They're going to win a lot of games. Now, Washington is almost like the Las Vegas Raiders, because the crazy part is they have a foundation, right? I mean, Eric Bieniemy is the new offensive coordinator. Sam Howell looked good in Week 18 against Dallas. He looked good in the preseason. We're going to see how he looks in the regular season. But, you've got Terry McLaurin. You have Curtis Samuel. You have Jahan Dotson. You have Antonio Gibson. You have Brian Robinson. Led by Chase Young and, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne. You have that terrific defensive line. But we've seen old school defensive-minded Ron Rivera run the ball and play defense philosophy has been Washington time and time again. Even if Eric Bieniemy has come over from Kansas City to lead their offense, I think that they're going to be limited because of that philosophy. I think Washington is going to get rid of Rivera at the end of the year. They obviously have new ownership and a new renowned sense above them. I think they're going to get their crap together eventually. But this year, they're a 6-win team that, in my opinion, has more talent than maybe some people in the NFL think. Speaking of lack of talent, outside of Saquon Barkley and Darren Waller, can you name me anybody legitimate on the New York Giants? And don't give me Daniel Jones, okay? Daniel Jones absolutely stinks. They have a good, tackle situation in Thomas and Neal. Okay, Darren Waller maybe worth a win here or there. I give it to you, but I just don't like the Giants because I don't like Daniel Jones, and I don't think Saquon Barkley is going to be healthy for a full season again. I think the Giants stink. I think they're going to go 3-14. They're going to learn their lesson about why you don't pay Daniel Jones $40 million a year, and that is that with the New York Giants. Very interesting division up next, the NFC West. I have the Niners winning it at 11-6. Their over-under is 10.5, so barely take the over. Same thing with Seattle, where their over-under is 9.5. I'm going 10 wins, 10-7. Rams over-under 6.5. I'm barely taking the over at 7-10. This is the safest bet on the board. Take the under with Arizona. I don't think they get to 5 wins. Their over-under is 4.5. I have them with 1 solo victory. I'll get to them in a little bit. I don't think Brock Purdy's the best quarterback in the world. I don't think Sam Darnold's the best quarterback in the world. They just got rid of Trey Lance. But San Francisco has one of the best rosters in the league. We know George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa, even with his contract dispute, will still lead the defensive line. They've done a lot of talking since their loss to Philadelphia in the NFC Championship game. I do not even think they're better than Dallas if Dallas gets their coaching together, but they're in the NFC West. They're going to win games. It's what Kyle Shanahan does in the regular season. And I would pick Seattle to win this division because I really love the combo of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, the rookie Jackson Smith and Jigba at receiver. They had 2 tackles last year that were both really good. Devin Witherspoon, the rookie out of Illinois at corner, will help their secondary. Kenneth Walker's a really good running back. But Geno Smith last year, let's be honest, overachieved. Last year, he threw 30 touchdowns and only 11 picks. He's going to regress a little bit this year. And Seattle was out-coached in all 3 games last year they played against San Francisco. They had a chance to get back in the game in all 3 scenarios, and they could not do it, which is why I do not trust them, and I think they finished second in the NFC West. Last year, the team to debate on who was going to be really good and who was going to be trash was the New Orleans Saints. This year, it's the LA Rams. And I can't name a person on their defense outside of Aaron Donald. They're going to have like 6 or 7 rookies starting, which is a makeup for a disaster, especially when your offensive line is bad. You have an injury-prone quarterback in Matthew Stafford. Cooper Kupp is dealing with a hamstring injury, and Aaron Donald's been talking about retirement. It comes down to if you believe Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Aaron Donald can make this Rams team a playoff contender, if they can make them better than Seattle in a weak conference, and I don't believe that is the case. And speaking of the team that is most certainly tanking, that is the Arizona Cardinals. And I will already say, congratulations, Caleb Williams. Get ready to move to Arizona because you are going to be an Arizona Cardinal. We know Kyler Murray is missing the first couple of weeks trying to recover from his ACL injury a year ago. They cut bait with DeAndre Hopkins. They wanted to cut bait with Budda Baker, but they couldn't find anybody for him. They cut bait with Isaiah Simmons. Jonathan Gannon is tanking. They have a war chest of draft picks. This team is going to be irrelevant. They got rid of Colt McCoy. They're going to start Josh Dobbs or somebody. Who the hell knows with the Arizona Cardinals, but they're going to be bad. I'll give them a 1 win just to avoid history, but this is going to be the worst team in the NFL by far. Moving on to the NFC North. The Lions are officially in weird territory because I think that they go 10-7. Their over-under is 9.5. I think they win the division. Minnesota at 8.5. If they're over, I'll take them 9 wins. Chicago's over under 7.5. I'll take them with 9 wins as well because they get swept by Minnesota. They don't make the postseason. And Green Bay, by the way, it's 7.5. I would bet the under on Green Bay. I don't think they get to 8 wins. The max I think they get to is when I have them at, which is 6-11. But as I was saying, the Lions are officially in weird territory. Because for the first time in my lifetime, they are favored to win their division. And after a slow start last year, when they started 1-6, they finished 7-3 in their final 10 games for a successful 8-9 campaign, which included them ending Aaron Rodgers' tenure in Green Bay. We know the offense side of the ball is not a question. We know what they have in Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, David Montgomery, obviously coming over from Chicago, Jahmyr Gibbs, the first round pick out of Alabama. Defensively, though, is a different story. Aiden Hutchinson, C.J. Gardner-Johnson are the only names of note. The one positive for the Detroit Lions is, as we know, Jared Goff struggles in cold weather. But this year, the only outdoor games they're going to play are Kansas City week 1. It's going to be warm. Green Bay week 4. So end of September, going to still be warm. You're going to avoid the cold. You go down to Tampa Bay in the sunshine in week 6. Baltimore week 7 could potentially be a little bit cold, but it could also be nice out, somewhere between 50 and 60 degrees. And then Chicago week 14. That's going to be the only cold game in their schedule. The rest of their games are in domes. So barring any rain, this team is essentially bad weather-proof outside of Chicago late in the year. We know Jared Goff struggles in cold weather. We know he's great in domes, which I think Goff's going to have a great year. I think 10 wins is a good amount for them, and I don't think that's their ceiling. There's so much talent for Dan Campbell's crew not to bite off some kneecaps, win some games. But I think they're a year away from being a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Now, we know Minnesota won 11 one-possession games last year, and because of that, I do not know what to make of them. Justin Jefferson's a stud. Kirk Cousins is an above-average quarterback. TJ Hawkinson's a great tight end. Jordan Addison is going to work because the Vikings always make wide receivers work. Now, the question offensively is going to be, can Alexander Mattison replicate what Dalvin Cook, who is now a Jet, obviously, did for them? And that remains to be seen because Madison's been great when Cook's been out, but can he carry the load for the entire year? I'm not sure. Defensively, they have a new defensive coordinator in Brian Flores, who was a terrific head coach in Miami. Though a lot like a lot of defensive coaches we talked about here today, defensive coaches don't embrace the quarterback position. Ed Donatell was a complete disaster. It's not going to get worse. There's not a lot of talent on this team outside of Daniil Hunter on defense, though. Minnesota's going to have to win by shootout. There's potential for them to win the division, but I think they're stuck at 9 wins and a wild card team. Now, the Bears. They are, to me, with the Browns, maybe two of the most interesting teams in the NFL this year because they could win 11, 12 games. They could also win 8 or 9 games. There is a world where, like Josh Allen did with Stephon Diggs, like Kyler Murray did with DeAndre Hopkins, like Jalen Hurts did with A.J. Brown, Justin Fields and DJ Moore, they could both pop and Justin Fields could have a big year. The difference here being I know Nick Sirianni was a great offensive play caller. I know Cliff Kingsbury was an offensive mind in Arizona. I knew Brian Dable was a great play caller in Buffalo. You are now getting Luke Getsy. How special was Luke Getsy with a defensive mind of Matt Eberflus? And they spent a lot of money on Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards at linebacker. The Bears are still a very defensive minded team. Will they let Justin Fields carry the offense? That is the question. And that's why I do believe that Chicago is going to be better, but I don't think it's going to be a huge pop to get them into the playoffs this year. I don't think Fields takes as much of a leap as Kyler did that 1 year in 2020, as Allen did in 2021, and as Hurts did in 2022. Speaking of not taking a leap, the Green Bay Packers are irrelevant. Jordan Love lost to Kent State in his last game in college. That's all you need to know. Quarterbacks don't sit that much anymore. In my opinion, if Jordan Love was ready to go, they would have went off Aaron Rodgers last year. As much as people like Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, they don't separate great in man coverage. Green Bay has a lot of tight ends. They have two good running backs in A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. That's about it. Their defense is going to be pretty good, but defense can only keep you in games for so long. And Green Bay will finish 6-11. And finally, the NFC South, which may have been the hardest division to choose in football. I got Carolina. They're over under at 7.5. I'm going to pick them with the over at 8 wins. Same thing with New Orleans, 8 wins. They're over under 9.5. Vegas is pretty high on the Saints. I'm not as high. Now, Atlanta, their over under is 8.5. I got them at 5 wins. I would safely bet the under. Same thing with Tampa. They're over under 6.5. I safely bet the under there with Tampa. I have them going 3-14. So the NFC South finished with all 4 teams below 500 last year, and I think it's going to happen again, even with all 4 teams having new quarterbacks and new coaches. The division's still not great. But the story here is Carolina has Frank Reich, who simply won everywhere he went, including Indianapolis, with all sorts of different quarterbacks. He personally traded up in the draft to get Bryce Young, and they still have some good weapons on the offensive side of the ball. DJ Chark, Adam Thielen, Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard, Terrence Marshall. That's a pretty good starting core for a team that last year won 7 games with Steve Wilkes, Matt Rule, PJ Walker, and Sam Darnold. So I'm a little bit more optimistic on Carolina than most people. I think Brian Burns, Jeremy Chin, great defensive pieces. Their offensive line is better than people think. I think Bryce Young's going to have a very good rookie year. And I think Carolina is going to win the division because of the coach they have. Because the Saints arguably have the better roster, right? Derek Carr and Michael Thomas is healthy. Taysom Hill, Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara when he returns from suspension, Jamal Williams, all the talent on the defense side of the ball, including Demario Davis, Cam Jordan, Marshawn Lattimore. But the problem is their coach is Dennis Allen, who's one of the worst coaches in history. And I know Derek Carr has never had a good defense. And Derek Carr is probably the easiest schedule he will ever play. Derek Carr is going to prove to us how good he is this year. I think Dennis Allen holds the Saints back, however. And Atlanta, I just have a weird vibe about. Their schedule is one of the easiest in the league. I mean, their 2 toughest games are the Jets and Jags. After that, they pretty much are dead even with everybody else in their schedule at the quarterback position. And their quarterback is Desmond Ridder, who we know nothing about. They got rid of Calvin Ridley last year at the trade deadline, but Drake London is really good at receiver. Kyle Pitts is really good. They brought in Jesse Bates. They brought in Calais Campbell to shore up that defense. And Bijan Robinson, I believe, will be the best player in fantasy football this year. I drafted him. My brother drafted him. We all believe here in the Lewis household in Bijan Robinson. I think he's going to be a special talent out of Texas at the running back position. But I think they're going to need to run the ball a lot because I don't think Desmond Ridder is the answer at quarterback. And finally, Tampa. I think Tampa wants to tank. They want to get Drake May out of North Carolina. They want to bring him into Tampa, Florida. They know Baker Mayfield is not the answer. They know Kyle Trask is not the answer. They honestly know Todd Bowles is not the answer. They want to reset post Brady, and that's okay. Mike Evans wants to stay there. We'll see if he will. Godwin wants to stay there. We'll see if he will. Same story for Shaq Barrett, Via Vea, Lavonte David. They have talent on this team. They need a new sense of urgency. They need a new voice, and they need a new quarterback to go along with the infrastructure that's in place. And we could see Tampa potentially pretty good in the next couple of years. Now we move on to the NFC conference standings. Where again, I think the Eagles are the number one seed at 13-4. Niners 11-6, Lions 10-7. Carolina takes the division at 8-9, but they have a worse record than Dallas, who finishes 11-6. Seattle at 10-7, Minnesota at 9-8, and that's going to make Bears fans upset because the Bears have a better record than the Panthers at 9-8, but they do not get in because of the NFL division format, as well as the Saints can contend with Carolina right there at 8-9 for the NFC South crown. NFC wildcard game. I think Kirk Cousins he turns into a pumpkin against the Niners defense. The Niners move on. I got Seattle shocking Detroit and the Lions' first playoff home game in forever. I think Jackson Smith-Njigba has a big game against the Lions bench secondary. Geno Smith moves on to the divisional round, and the Dallas front with DeMarcus Lawrence, Micah Parsons overwhelms the rookie Bryce Young, and Dallas moves on for a rematch with San Francisco for the third straight year in the playoffs, as well as Seattle and Philadelphia. A team the Eagles have not beat since 2008, and I don't think they beat them in the regular season matchup in week 15 either, but they get their revenge here on their home field. Jalen Hurts comes for them. I do not see a world where Dallas can lose to San Francisco for 3 straight years in the playoffs, which sets up an all NFC East NFC Championship game between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys, which the Eagles will win at home to get us to the Super Bowl, which is the last 2 Super Bowl losers. Yes, I know you've all been waiting here all this time to hear my take on who's going to the Super Bowl. The Bengals, who lost Super Bowl 56 to the Rams, the Eagles, who lost Super Bowl 57 to the Chiefs. They match up, and the Eagles' defensive line overwhelmed Cincinnati's offensive line, and Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles get their revenge from last year. The Philadelphia Eagles are your Super Bowl 58 champions in Las Vegas, Nevada, and that is not a homer pick. I think the Eagles have a top 2, if not top 1, top 3 roster in the National Football League. I think Jalen Hurts is one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen at, being able to handle adversity, being able to handle pressure. The defensive line, the receivers, the running backs. This team has all the ingredients. There is not a hole, in my opinion. And as I keep mentioning, the NFC is significantly weaker than the AFC. Cincinnati will be hardened by having to go through Baltimore, by having to go through the Jets, by having to go through Kansas City. But in the end, the Philadelphia Eagles walk away Las Vegas Super Bowl champions. My division winners are as follows: the Buffalo Bills, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Philadelphia Eagles, the San Francisco 49ers, the Detroit Lions, and the Carolina Panthers. Now, here are the teams that I am best betting throughout the year when it comes to over-under win total. I have New England at 7.5. I would take the under. In the AFC West, the Las Vegas Raiders at 7.5. I would also take the under. In the AFC North, the Cincinnati Bengals at 11.5. I would also take the over. Jacksonville at 9.5. Take the over. NFC East, the Giants at 7.5. Take the under. The NFC West, Arizona at 4.5. take the under. The NFC North, the Green Bay Packers at 7.5, take the under. And in the NFC South, there's two teams here. Atlanta at 8.5, take the under, and then Tampa Bay at 6.5, also take the under. I hope you enjoyed this segment. This was my entire 2023 NFL predictions set in stone for the year. Like that clip from the Brands World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brands World podcast right here on YouTube.